Welcome, and thanks for tuning in to Unacquired Chef's YouTube channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned for more culinary innovations coming your way. This video is a quick demo on how to make Sambal Laksa. Sambal is a condiment native to Southeast Asia. Now, almost every country has at least one kind, but today's version is a Malaysian kind, and it's the type that you have with laksa. Now, the traditional version has shrimp in it, and these are the ingredients for it. However, I am going to do a vegan version for my plant-based folks out there. The ingredients are roughly the same, but let me walk through the traditional version first, and then I'll switch over to the vegan type. So to start, I have 10 red chilies. Now, these are not bird's eye chilies, these are the big ones, and I have 10 of them because I really want the color without too much of the spice. Next up, I have a garlic clove, just one's fine. I also have to add red shallots. Now I have here a red onion, and I just want to call out the difference if you're not familiar between the two. I don't want a red onion, preferably. I want a red shallot, and they kind of look like French shallots, except they're red in color. So you know how to have little bulbs in them? Basically, you want 2 bulbs. Now each bulb probably weighs about 25 grams. So 50 grams in total. Now if you can't find red shallots, I would strongly recommend French shallots instead. But if you really can't find either, then I suppose red onion will be fine. Just know that red onions are more oniony than shallots. Shallots have a more mild, delicate flavor. So that's the only thing that's going to be a little bit different. Not the end of the world, something to play with, but just a heads up on that. Now, those are all the ingredients, barring the shrimp paste, or what we call belacan bakar. Belacan means shrimp paste, and bakar means roasted. So we want the roasted kind, and as you can see in this photo, it's sort of the block kind that you chop up. You want 50 grams of that as well to go in with this. Now, that's it basically for the traditional ingredients, barring salt, sugar, and oil, which I'll walk you through in a second. So I'm going to switch over now to the vegan ingredients. All right, so the vegan ingredients are similar. Instead of the 2 shallot bulbs, red shallot bulbs, I'm going to be using 4 in total, and I'm doubling that up because I'm only using 5 red chilies instead of 10. And the reason for that is because I'm actually going to be adding soybean chili paste, as you can see. Now, this is the Thai version, and I love it because what it does is it actually brings that umami flavor that prawns would without the animal product in it. So we're going to be adding 50 grams of that instead of the shrimp belacan. Now, to go with that, we're actually going to be adding half a nori sheet, and that's just going to give the sea flavor that shrimp has, which soy does not. So that together will kind of bring it out into making it, in terms of the flavors at least, closer to a traditional sambal laksa. Now, the last thing I'm also adding is garlic, and I'm going to be doing 2 of those instead of 1. Again, just to kind of increase the mass of what's missing from the red chili. That's the real intent behind that. Now, to go with that as well, some salt and sugar. But what I'll do is I'll get started with the prep work so that we can get everything going into this blender over here, because that's really what it is. It's about putting all this stuff into the blender, getting that into a nice fine paste. And then once that's done, then we'll fry it until it turns a dark, rich red color. So let's do that together now. I'm just going to grab myself the blender jug to get going, my trusty KitchenAid, and everything's going to go into it. Now I have a few things to chop up, so I'm going to do that first, and then we can get going with the blender itself. So here we go. First up, I'm going to do my onions just to get that in. Now, I'm not going to do very sort of fancy chopping, really. The blender is going to do most of the work. I'm just going to kind of roughly chop it up just to make sure it's kind of not getting the blender knife to do too much work. And I'm just going to immediately throw all of that in. I like to get the onions in at the bottom simply because they tend to be juicy, and it allows the blender blade to not work as hard as it usually would. So a total of 4 of those shallots. And you'll notice that they're kind of different in size. Nature has its way. So kind of don't be too obsessive about it, just so long as it's sitting roughly at the 100-gram mark instead of the 50-gram mark that we would have used for the traditional version. You're all good to go on that front. So there it is. That's all the onions in the jug, all of it. And now we're going to go ahead and do the chili. So we're going to take the heads off, and there's a total of 5 of them. And then we're going to just kind of do a rough chop again, so that, as with the onions, not getting the blender to work very, very hard. So I'm just going to do them 2 at a time. And we do want the seeds and all. Now, if you are sort of a little bit worried that even with these large red chilies that it's still going to be a bit spicy, then go ahead and take the seeds out. However, I'm a big fan of spice, so I'm not going to take them out. Now, the soybean chili paste does have a little bit of heat to it, so if your tolerance for chili is quite low, I would strongly recommend taking the seeds out. And you can just kind of do that by slicing it out the side, just like so, opening it up, going in with a spoon, and then just kind of from the tip to the end, just pull it all out. You can use a teaspoon to do that, and that'll set you up right to make sure that you don't have all those seeds in there as well. As I said, I'm certainly going to be putting them in. All right, now the garlic is the next one that goes in. I do want to make sure I get all the seeds in because it's quite lovely. Now, the garlic's pretty simple. It's just a nice quick bash, and we're good to go with that one. And you'll notice that I'm not doing more than 2, even though the original recipe only calls for 1. And the reason again here is to increase the mass that's lacking from the amount of chilies that we would typically have in this blended paste. And the real reason for not putting more than 2 is because, like ginger and turmeric and garlic as well, these sorts of ingredients tend to add bitterness when added in high quantities. So we just want to make sure we don't make the dish bitter. Now I'm done with all my chopping. I'm just going to get rid of my board, and what we can do is put the rest of the ingredients in and then get going with the blender. So I'm going to do my nori sheets just with a little scissors. I'm just going to go lengthways in there. Blender will do the rest, and just kind of get that sort of slightly shredded up. And the other thing that needs to go in the paste, so that's just all of that, that's 50 grams of it from that little bottle that I showed you before. There it is on the side, just in case you wanted to grab a picture of it. But yes, all of that goes in. Now, this is a pretty dry blend paste, and we're not going to be trying to add water to it. That's not the thing we want to add. We do have to fry all of this in about ½ a cup of oil. And so what we'll do is add some of that oil into this paste, enough to get the blender blade running. And that should be enough for us to get the paste blended into a fine sort of a texture. And then the rest of it we will use to actually fry the paste itself. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and put in about a tablespoon's worth, maybe keep the rest for frying. Hopefully that's enough, but we'll stop and check paste as we kind of go through. I'm just going to drizzle that all the way through to make sure that it gets enough coverage. All right, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and blend this baby up, and here it is. I'm just going to go in with this spatula to kind of help the itty bitty bits on the side get back into the mix closer to the blade. And we'll give that another whirl and see how we go. If it needs some oil, we'll certainly throw that in as well. So here we go again. All right, I'm actually going to try pulsing it just to really see whether or not, just so you can see the buttons on the side, I'm actually going to try and do a pulse. Let's see if that helps. I think that helped. All right, so we have it in what I would consider a very, very fine paste. And that's good to go from my perspective. I'll quickly tip the blender downward to you so you can see it, but that's where it's at. The green bits are fine because that's just the seaweed. That's not going to completely pulverize, and that's actually okay because you can get these little bites of seaweed. But yeah, now that's ready to fry. And so what we'll do next is get the pan ready to go. We've got the remainder of the oil that we're going to heat up in the pan, and then we're going to add a blended paste into it along with some salt and sugar. Let that pan come to a heat first. So in the meantime, I am going to, and I have it on a high heat at the moment just so that it can get completely heated through. Scrape the bottoms, sorry, the sides rather, of the jug so that we can get that ready to pour into the hot oil. All right. We should start to see some slight small bubbles pop up, really fine. So you might not be able to see it on the camera, but that's what you're looking for. Just itty bitty bubbles or just kind of uneven surface on the oil. It's a sign that the oil has heated up. So I'm just going to leave that there, get my salt and sugar ready. So we're going to go in with half a teaspoon of salt. And we're going to go in with one tablespoon of sugar. I'm just going to add that in to the bowl. So we have that on standby. So that was 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of sugar. That oil is starting to heat up now. And I'm just going to start to, it's starting to slightly get uneven and slightly bubbly. So that means it's ready for the paste. So yeah, there's a lot of water in the paste that gets evaporated as part of the cooking. And so initially when I pop it in, it's going to be quite sizzly. So bear with me when I do that. It will start to quiet down a little bit once some of that water starts to evaporate. So let's go in with it. Beautiful color, beautiful smell actually. What we want to do is on that high heat, allow all of that oil to get in between all the bits of ingredients that were blended. Now that's really important for a couple of reasons. One is we need for all those raw ingredients to get completely cooked. And the only way for that to happen is for the oil to get acquainted with the blended paste. So we're just going to let that cook. Now we want to basically see a couple of things happen with regards to this paste. we'll start to see this sort of simmer, if you like, start to soften because most of the water would have come out of the paste. The other thing we'll start to see is for it to darken and also for it to start to separate from the oil and paste perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and drop that 1 teaspoon of salt. And it's important we throw it in now because the ingredients just hit the oil, which means their pores have just opened up. And that's the right time to throw salt in, because that's when the salt can actually get into the crevices and really enhance the flavor of the sambal nice and early, unlike the traditional version of throwing salt in at the end just to see whether or not it tastes right. Here, we want to make sure it goes in nice and early. The sugar will add a little bit later, but the salt must go in first. Part of cooking sambal, or really any paste, spice paste that has root vegetables in it, part of it's actually got to do with the fact that you do want it to last long. And the way in which it lasts long, or rather doesn't go rancid, is to make sure all the water is evaporated and all the ingredients are cooked properly. And that is why it's so important to cook it up in the oil the way we're doing right now. And you can even see those little itty bitty bits of seaweed still, which is totally fine. You don't want to, you want to be able to, as I mentioned before, bite into some of that, which is good. But what we'll start to see is the smell of raw onion and garlic and chili start to disappear. And that should get replaced with just a cooked umami sweetness that I can actually start to smell now. And we should see the shade of it, as I mentioned before, go darker. And finally, some oil start to separate toward the edges of the pan, which we're starting to see, but it's not quite there yet. Now's the time I'm actually going to add in the sugar because it's going to just give that caramelization effect while we're doing it. And so long as it is completely cooked in terms of the smell and the oil separation, that's your cue to switch it off. You don't want to overcook it, but at the same time, you want to make sure it's cooked just the right amount. And so I'm just leaning in to get that sniff test done. It's almost there. Keep going for a little bit longer. All right. As you can see, that's starting to darken. And I wish smell-o-vision existed because you'd be able to smell some of this stuff. So that's my cue to drop the heat down by half. Now that it's starting to darken, I don't want to burn it. There is a lot of oil in there, so there is a possibility of overcooking it, and then the fine line between cooked and burnt. So dropping the heat allows you to slow down the cooking process and make sure you catch it before it completely flips. And remember, the oil's in there and that oil retains a lot of heat. So even after you stop, or rather switch off the fire, it's still going to cook. And I would actually say, let me give it another. I would say that a little bit longer before we start to see the oil separating. I want to see it separate just a wee bit more. It is starting to separate around the edges. So hopefully you can see that. Can you, just along the edges, you can see a ring of oil start to form, which is great. That's my cue to knock the fire off because it's still going to keep cooking. And you'll remember at the beginning, if you go back in the video, it was a nice sort of bright orange, sort of a red color. And now it's just gone into this sort of maroon, dark marmalade color, if you like. And that is just perfect. We can see some of that oil separating all along. Whenever I do a little bit of an S, you'll see that there's more of a sort of a yellow highlight around the edges. That means the oil separated, and that means it's perfectly done. So again, the oil, the sniff, and the color. You get 2 out of 3 right, I think you're set. All right, so we are going to let that cool before I pour it into a bowl. And then we should be able to add it to our laksa dish once we're ready to, well, keep it in the fridge for up to a week, 2 weeks tops, or else you can freeze it up to 2 months. You could go longer, but I like to err on the side of caution. But yeah, there's your sambal laksa ready to go. I'm gonna grab myself a bowl so I can pour it into. And there you have it, beautifully done. Does smell quite sweet too. I think that some of that sugar is coming through, which is lovely. I am going to finish pouring this guy out. And then switch so you can see a nice upfront view of this guy. And there you have it. Beautiful sambal laksa. You can see some of that oil sit around the top. It's actually quite lovely. It actually works as a bit of a preservative too. So you'll have the sambal, you'll try to avoid the oil, of course, but you'll leave it in the bottle so that it actually gives it an opportunity to stop air from getting into it. And there you have it. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you very soon.